Once upon a time in midwinter, when the snowflakes were falling like feathers from heaven, a beautiful queen sat sewing at a window which had a frame of black ebony wood. As she sewed, she looked up at the snow and pricked her finger with the needle. 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow. The red on the white looked so beautiful that she thought, "If only I had a child, as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as this frame." Soon afterwards, she had a little daughter that was as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as ebony wood, and therefore they called her Little Snow White. Hi everyone, my name's T.
And my name's SJ.
And we're Crumbs of Science, a podcast about looking at the science of fairy tales. And if you couldn't tell from that intro, today's episode will be about Snow White.
Another one from Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, published originally in their 1812 book of fairy tales, but perhaps one of the most copied fairy tales.
Definitely one of the most retold, I think, reinterpreted.
I think in our lifetime alone, there's been at least 8 versions of it that we can
let's
see.
See if I can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's 16 different adaptions just from the 80s.
Movies?
Yes, and those are just movies as well. That's not counting TV series, stage adaptions, comic adaptions, novel adaptions, video game adaptions. It's a pretty popular tale.
For a story that personally I think isn't that great. Snow White always annoyed me a lot when I was a kid. I found her to be a very wishy-washy heroine, especially the Disney version, and her voice is so high. Her songs are very annoying, and you can't sing along to them like you can in Mulan.
So Snow White, the original tale, basically it is all about the queen and how she really wants to stay young.
I think she wants to be the most beautiful. She is supremely vain, and the only thing she really cares about is being the most beautiful person in the land, which really isn't a great characteristic for a queen.
Every day she asks, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of them all?" And the mirror always answers, "You, my queen, are fairest of them all." But her daughter, or in the second edition, her stepdaughter, is becoming more beautiful with every passing day. And when she turns 7, the queen asks the mirror who the fairest of them all. The mirror gives a quite different answer. "You, my queen, are fair, it is true. But little Snow White is still 1,000 times fairer than you," which is...
Can we say that talking about a 7-year-old like this is problematic and should not be a thing?
Yeah, it's just... Yeah.
It's not okay.
We don't talk much about what's the mirror's deal here.
The mirror has some skewed ideas and really should be thrown on the ground and smashed, which I know would give you 7 years of bad luck. But still, I think that's worth it for not trying to trick you into hating your child.
The mirror's really the instigator of all of this. Enrages the queen, who becomes incredibly envious and lets her heart fill with hatred for his daughter, or stepdaughter. This continues until one day the queen had been filled with so much rage that she demands a huntsman to take Snow White out into the woods to a remote spot and stab her to death. And for proof that she's dead, bring her lungs and her liver back to the queen so she could cook them with salt and eat them.
Well, at least she's adding some spices. I mean, that makes it all okay.
Exactly, yeah. You don't want to be eating just, unseasoned meat.
That's the line.
That's where we draw the line.
Oh, pretty much. The huntsman takes Snow White into the woods, and then because the huntsman has a heart and is not horrible and probably doesn't have that little mirror talking in his ear the whole time going, "Kill small children, it's fine." He's about to kill her, and then Snow White, because she's 7 years old, begins to cry, asks to spare her life, and he takes pity on her. Though the line here is because she was so beautiful, which once again, 7 years old, not okay. And he thought, she's in the wilds in the middle of the woods. She's 7. She's going to die. It's fine.
Yeah. And he can live with that. He just can't live with stabbing her personally. So
leaving her for death, that's completely okay. So instead, he grabs a young boar, kills it, cuts out the lungs and the liver, and takes them back to the queen instead as proof of Snow White's death. And she then cooks them with salt and eats them.
So Snow White, left alone in the woods, ran all day through the forest until she came to a little cottage just before sunset. Inside, everything was neat and orderly, with 7 of everything. Now, there's an interesting difference from the Disney version, because in the Disney version, they're very keen on her being a tidier. Like, she already has that song about tidying up before she even gets to the cottage. And then she shows up and everything's messy because men can't take care of themselves. But in the original, the dwarves are pretty organized. Like, they've got their communal living arrangements sorted.
Might also be the difference in age, that at the Disney version, I think she's the youngest Disney princess, but she's still supposed to be 14 compared to the 7 that she was in this age.
She gets into the house and she tries something from every place setting at the table, and then tries all the beds and settles on the 7th. And
She also drinks all their wine.
for a 7-year-old, that's efficient.
So Snow White, once she had tried all the food and had something to drink, she then fell asleep because she's 7 and she's drunk. And then the 7 dwarves came back home and they discovered her lying on one of their beds, fast asleep. Now, they seem like, as well as quite tidy human beings, they were also quite nice, though still thought she was beautiful. So, I've got problems with a lot of people in this story. But she's beautiful, so they liked her and they let her sleep.
And when she wakes up, the dwarves go, you can stay as long as you keep house, cook, sew, make beds, wash, knit, keep everything clean and orderly, and they'll just come home in the evening and supper must be ready. But they had to spend their days digging for gold in the mine. While they're away, they said, you need to watch out for the queen and don't let anyone in.
Valid advice for a 7-year-old. So the queen, thinking that she had eaten the organs of her child, the next day she went and stepped in front of her mirror and said her usual refrain, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" However, the mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but little Snow White beyond the 7 mountains is 1,000 times fairer than you."
Mirror just loves stirring her up. Yeah. Like, the mirror just lives for drama. Just a messy bench who lives for drama. So the queen begins to plot into how to kill Snow White once and for all and decides upon dressing up as a peddler selling corsets. And she arrives at the cottage and Snow White goes, I could do with a corset, and lets her in. And the queen then tightens the corset so tight that Snow White couldn't breathe, and she faints. But just before she dies, the dwarves arrive in time to save her and warn her, don't let anyone in. Stop letting people in.
Next morning, Queen tries again. However, the mirror once again replies because Snow White is still alive and that mirror is just stirring. She decides she's going to make a poisoned comb. And Snow White, who has slightly learnt, when the evil queen comes up to her door, Snow White calls out, "I'm not allowed to let anyone in." Then she pulls out her comb and then the woman says, "Let me comb your hair." She put it into Snow White's hair and the girl fell down and was dead.
Well, nearly dead.
It does say the girl was dead.
The queen then goes home with a light heart, and the dwarves again come home just in time, and they pull out the poison comb, which stops the poison somehow, and Snow White opens her eyes and comes back to life. And she then promises the dwarves, "I won't let anyone in again."
No, so once again the queen talks to her mirror. Mirror stirs some stuff. And the queen is so angry that she says, "Snow White will die if it costs me my life." Then she went into her most secret room that no one else was allowed inside and made a poisoned apple. She disguised herself as a peasant woman, went to the dwarves' house and knocked on their door. Snow White peers out. "I'm not allowed to let anyone in. The dwarves have forbidden it most severely." That's my impression of a 7-year-old. The woman convinces her and says, "I'm selling apples. I will give you one to taste." Then eventually tricks her and says, "If you're afraid, then I will cut the apple in 2 and eat half of it. Here, you eat the half with the beautiful red cheek." And now, because the queen, even though she's horrible, is fairly smart, she'd made an apple, so only half of it was poisoned. So Snow White saw that she was eating one half and thought, oh, it must be fine. She took the other half through the window, bit into it, but she had barely had the bite in her mouth when she fell to the ground dead. And finally, when the queen went home, super happy, asked the mirror, and it answered, "You, my queen, are fairest of all."
So it's a generous definition of dead they're using here, because the dwarves come home and this time there's nothing to be done to save her. And after crying for 3 days, they discovered she was still as beautiful as she'd ever been. So she wasn't rotting, and they made a glass coffin to lay her in. Then time passes. Who knows how much time passes. And then a prince stumbles upon the cottage and happens to see Snow White. He then decides, he could not live another day if he wasn't able to gaze upon her every day. Again, she's 7 years old this time. I don't know.
He's seen that she's the daughter of a king because they wrote a nice little inscription on there. And because he can't do without seeing her, he asked the dwarves to sell him the coffin of Snow White. So he's just asked to buy a coffin with a little dead girl inside
Love
it.
to buy beautiful dead bodies. Normal hobbies.
This no warning signs on this prince at all. He's okay. So the dwarves refused to part because they liked looking on her 7-year-old dead beauty. But eventually the dwarves took pity on him and gave him the coffin.
So then he gets the coffin and he brings it to his castle and has it placed in a room where he sits by it the whole day, never taking his eyes from it. Whenever he had to go out and was unable to see Snow White, he became very sad, and he could not eat unless the coffin was sitting next to him. And then the servants, who always had to carry the coffin to and fro, became very angry about this. And eventually, one of them became so angry, he opened the coffin, lifted Snow White upright, and said, "We are plagued the whole day long just because of a dead girl." And he hit her in the back with his hand. So just a little bit of a Heimlich. And the terrible piece of apple that had been stuck in her throat came out of her throat, and she came back to life. She then came up to the prince, who was beside himself with joy, obviously, and they sat down at the table and ate together.
Still a little bit confused because I feel like if I just came out of a coma and then found this weird guy next to me, I wouldn't just sit and eat a meal.
But I mean, I'd be pretty hungry after undisclosed amount of time.
He's
being
hoping
dead.
it's at least 11 years. Fingers crossed. They decided to get married the next day because she didn't need to check him out and see if they were compatible.
I love the phrase in here. Their wedding was set for the next day, and Snow White's godless mother was invited as well. Now, the prince doesn't actually know that she tried to kill Snow White, and the queen doesn't know that this is Snow White getting married, because the mirror says, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who in this land is fairest of them all?" And the mirror answers, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." And she doesn't know this is Snow White. She just knows that someone else is now fairer. I've killed Snow White. So her jealousy drives her to go to the wedding and see the young queen. And when she arrives, it's Snow White. And Snow White goes, "It's my damn mother who's just tried to kill me."
But then, because they're a fair and equitable team and believe in forgiveness, oh, we're joking, this is a fairy tale.
They put her in some hot shoes. Not just any hot shoes, red hot iron shoes in the fire until they glowed, and then put them on the queen's feet, and then she had to dance in them. Her feet were terribly burned, and she could not stop until she had danced herself to death.
Yay!
And that's Snow White.
Definitely. I also find it interesting that there's no king. Her dad is never mentioned.
Just not in the
in
picture.
the story. Which is unusual because usually they just kill off the women with no warning.
How long was Snow White out for?
We couldn't find an actual number other than our hope of legal age going on there. But then again, then he would have been, I don't, it's all a bit confusing.
Yeah, it's a lot going on.
Not even a morally grey area, just not okay, really. And we decided to chat to a doctor, Dr Jake Barlow, friend of the show, to have a chat with us. So, Jake, can you tell us, if you wanted to poison someone, would an apple be the best way to do it?
I think it would depend on the nature of the poisons, but I think on the balance of sort of what we're talking about, probably honestly the courses. There's certainly people who have died from just either being crushed on their chest and so unable to breathe because they don't have enough muscular strength to expand their chest wall and therefore generate a negative pressure inside their chest and actually breathe. A tight enough corset that prevented the movement of the ribs enough could absolutely be fatal. Poisons, depends on the nature of the poison. But in general, something that's ingested is going to be more effective than something that's applied to the skin or such as with the comb.
So, if you wanted to wake someone up from a coma, is slapping them the best method?
The short answer would be no. The long answer is also no, with a comma and then more things after it. So it depends on the cause of the coma, really. The fundamental thing is to treat the underlying cause, of which there are many potential causes. The general sort of causing a physical stimulus to someone, like slapping, is to try and provide some sort of stimulus to see a response. And so usually the magnitude of the stimulus required kind of gives an indication of how deeply comatose someone is. And so we do that sometimes by talking to people and seeing what they do. If they open their eyes, if they talk back to us, or if they don't do anything. Or usually the other option is to cause some sort of painful stimulus. So the classic ones in TV shows and things are the sternal rub, where you sort of grind your knuckles into someone's sternum. The other things that people may choose to do is pressure on the nail bed, so where the fingernail begins is quite sore if you press hard on that. It's not very nice, but the idea is to see if someone is responding to a stimulus on that sort of side, and pain is a pretty profound stimulus.
Thank you for chatting to us on the show again.
Even though we call them fairy tales, and today we associate fairy tales with children, hopefully you realise by what we've discussed that probably wasn't their primary audience. It was more just folklore, so stories that were told and passed down orally over the years.
Two things were happening around this time. It was Industrial Revolution was kind of in full swing. It mechanised a lot of the jobs. It was centralising a lot of the jobs. And Germany was under some level of French occupation at this time as well. So German national identity was under threat. The Brothers Grimm were part of kind of a nationwide project to collect German folklore and make authentic, in scare quotes, German culture more codified.
So if that was the time of mechanism, does that mean that it's unlikely that seven dwarfs worked together in a mine to find gold?
Well, that would have been part of the reason they chose this story, is that it was somewhat celebration of like manual labour and collective labour as well. So one of the changes they made in the 1819 version was changing it from being the queen being her mother to the queen being her stepmother. So they inserted, as soon as the child was born, the queen died. A year later, the king took himself another wife. She was a beautiful woman, but she was proud and arrogant and could not stand it if anyone would surpass her in beauty.
We know that the Brothers Grimm, did they have a stepmother? Because they definitely did not like the stepmothers. So they seem to have added this one on to be part of their evil stepmother trope, which we have mentioned before in...
Stepmother would be in...
Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. So the Brothers Grimm, despite their love of the evil stepmother trope, they actually didn't have a stepmother. Their father died before their mother did. Terry Windling, an editor of children and adult books, she's argued that for the Brothers Grimm, the bad mother had to disappear in order for the ideal mother to survive and allow the mother symbol to flourish. It helps maintain the reverence of the maternal figure without sacrificing this nuclear family dynamic. And they also changed how she returns to life. So I mentioned in the story that a servant pulls her out of the coffin and slaps her because he's just so annoyed at carrying a dead girl around, which, look, fair. What they did is instead they changed it to, as they're carrying around this coffin, one of the servants trips over a bush and the shake is enough to dislodge the apple from the throat, which, again, it's a change to make it more appealing to the masses and also to probably not get royally censored, because you're not encouraging now assault upon royals.
In the version that I have, it's actually the prince that carrying the coffin. And when he went to lift the coffin, the apple fell from her mouth. So even more so, he didn't even have servants to carry Snow White for him. He just did it out of the kindness of his own heart.
So the story has changed quite a bit over the years, and Disney went and changed it even more.
So as an aficionado on all things Disney, as we said, they changed her age and they made her 14. When he went to wake her up, I believe that he kissed her, and it was the kiss of true love which brought her back to life. So the Disney version is a lot nicer. And of course, how does the Queen die at the end of the Disney version? Is it even mentioned?
So this was basically one of the earliest Disney deaths. The dwarfs chase the evil queen to a cliff where she attempts to push a boulder down onto the dwarves, but her efforts of pushing the boulder result in the cliff that she's standing on falling off. So not only does she not be murdered, it basically makes her death an accident, and she just falls to her death, which leaves her death ambiguous.
But really, can we condemn the Queen's plight, considering that she just wants to stay young and beautiful forever in a time when she didn't have moisturizer? So she had to do what it takes.
I mean, if I didn't have moisturizer, I would definitely resort to murder. That would be my second option. Yeah.
If you can't be the most beautiful in the land, kill everyone else who is until you are the most beautiful. Beauty and anti-aging has been on people's minds for thousands of years, and it's actually really legitimate for it to be a concern, because it's been proven that If you want to get ahead in the business world, for men, you need to be tall and people automatically judge you as being more authoritative. And for women, it's if you're beautiful, people are more likely to trust you and they're more likely to believe what you say and to think that what you say is right. But even in a normal makeup or skincare routine, there are a number of weird things that you would never have thought of. I found one serum, which is something that you put on your face after you have cleansed and toned, of course, but before you moisturize, which included vitamin C, licorice extract, glycolic acid, lactic acid, azelaic acid, squalene, and hyaluronic acid. And I have heard all of these separately in different beauty products and things as things that you need to have now on your face to make your complexion better so that you can stay young. There is a big search for youth and for anti-aging products, and to the point where it's been estimated that Australian women will spend between $15,000 and $250,000 in their lives on these products, which equates to about $331 a month, which is so much money. When, having spoken to a dermatologist, the only real things that you can do to keep your skin looking young are to use skincare, to drink water, to exercise, and to get enough sleep. But that's the search for eternal beauty. The search for eternal life and immortality has one of my actual personal heroes, Elizabeth Blackburn, has been involved in this, and she won a Nobel Prize for her work on the discovery of telomeres and telomerase. And telomeres are the caps at the end of your DNA that when your cells split and they replicate, it helps them do that, and your telomeres will lengthen and shorten based on your life and based on stress factors within your life. And a lot of her work after she won the Nobel Prize is on how people can live longer based on the length of your telomeres and the stuff that she said. So it's actually been proven that women who are in relationships that involve domestic abuse are likely to have very shortened telomeres, and that means that it doesn't particularly affect how long you will live, but it affects how long you will stay healthy, is more to the point of it. So they're more likely to have premature onset of different diseases or their muscles weakening and so on. It's understandable that so much work goes into the search for immortal life. Professor David Sinclair from the University of New South Wales, who discovered the anti-aging properties of a red wine compound called resveratrol in 2003, and this might be something that you've heard about. However, the human trial stalled when it found that the high concentrations needed to actually have an anti-aging effect did cause you to have diarrhea. So, which honestly, I feel like that's a worthy payoff, but maybe that's just me. But now his team is currently actually looking at NMN, which is another molecule but linked to energy production. And the article that I found says that human trials actually should have been happening last year, though I haven't seen much more. So maybe the human trials didn't go that well. Another area that they were looking at in Australia was led by Professor Stephen Simpson at the University of Sydney. And he was looking at focusing on restricting calories, because that's another one that I'm sure people have heard, that if you do the intermittent fasting or if you do the Atkins or you do the just don't eat anything, then you're more likely to live longer. So there has been a lot of research done behind restricting calories, but according to him, there hadn't been much study on what type of calories were important. So he looked at a fruit fly eating a low protein and high carbohydrate diet, and that led to an extended lifespan. So they think that this might be something that could help. So now he's testing a couple of different dietary ideas, such as looking at more plant-based proteins and eating fish and complex carbohydrates, which I feel like we've all been told are the things that you are supposed to eat. But he's doing some more tests on those and looking at mice who, if they have a high protein diet, they will have increased testosterone, more lean muscle mass, and better reproductive health. However, they will have a shortened lifespan. So over the course of history, there have been lots of different methods involved in trying to keep people young and also trying to keep people beautiful. And despite modern advances in technology, they haven't found the be-all and end-all cure yet. But just so you know, there are a lot of people spending a lot of money looking for it. So keep an ear out in the future, and there should definitely be even further advances in this field. So we've spoken a bit about the science of staying young and the search for eternal life. So we decided that we'd chat to someone who had a bit more expertise on this area. So we got Hannah, who has a PhD in vascular cells and using them to heal wounds in humans. Did I get that right at all?
That's very good. Very
Excellent.
good.
Thank you so much for coming and having a chat to us, Hannah.
No worries.
Now, when we were discussing this, we had this idea in our mind of that the way that the evil queen stayed young was eating the hearts of people, which turns out was a bit false, but is mentioned in Snow White and the Huntsman, and that's one of the ways that she stays youthful. So we wanted to ask you, would eating a heart be the best method for staying young?
Look, I think the short answer is no.
Oh.
But I think I can kind of see where they're going with it, like symbolically, because you can imagine that like eating the heart, it's like the center of the cardiovascular system. It's like where blood pumps from, and blood is certainly full of like all sorts of signaling molecules and hormones that contribute to rejuvenation in different tissues of the body. And there are, in fact, studies looking at how young blood can help you to stay young and beautiful, I suppose, which they've, of course, only done in mice so far. But what they do is they take the vascular system of an old mouse and the vascular system of a young mouse, and they basically stitch them together so that they have one circulatory system and they're sharing their blood. And what they found is that old mice, which are weirdly attached to young mice, can rejuvenate their muscles and their brains way faster than old mice who are doing it alone.
What is the vascular system? Which areas are they?
So it's the blood vessels in your body that pump your blood around.
The plumbing.
The plumbing,
Okay.
exactly. And so your blood carries oxygen, it carries heaps of metabolic factors and lots of hormones which can signal for your tissue to develop in a certain way. So that does work in mice. They don't know yet if it works in humans. But the key thing there is that the blood of the young, beautiful mouse is going directly into the veins of the old witch mouse. And so I'm not sure that eating or consuming blood or the heart could have the same effect, unfortunately.
Does the digestive system tend to get in the way of that sort of...
Yes, I imagine so. I imagine most of it would pass straight through. You might get some nutritional value, but certainly not in terms of rejuvenation.
So eating the heart wouldn't work, but what about the lungs and the liver as it was in the original version?
Yeah. So again, probably not like the direct route to useful signaling factors.
Digestive system says no.
Digestive system does say no. But like technically eating the lungs of humans or like the organs of humans is not going to be nutritionally any worse than eating the organs of other animals, I suppose. And in fact, there has been this like really weird research done fairly recently where they extrapolated all this data from the 40s and the 50s when it was legal to do like things like look at the chemical composition of dead bodies.
Before ethics councils got
yes,
the way.
before ethics said no. And they kind of extrapolated all that data and calculated the nutritional value of all the different organs of the human body for what's a blanket kind of field called nutritional cannibalism, which freaks me out a little bit. And in fact, it turns out if you want to gain any sort of benefits from eating human tissue, the best thing to eat is the fat pads.
Where are
Like-
is that in your fingers, like your finger pads, or?
I think we've got fat pads all over, just
all
any
over?
kind of like fat deposits, which are wrapped around other organs. Because adipose tissue, which is fat tissue, is actually like really amazing at regeneration. So like adipose cells can turn into lots of different other types of cells, so they can contribute to the regeneration of different types of tissue in a way that other cell types can't. Going back to the whole concept of how good blood is at rejuvenation, they are, like I said, most of the studies have been in mice, but they're doing studies at the moment in humans, which we don't know yet if they work, looking at whether plasma treatment from young healthy subjects, so isolating plasma from the blood of young healthy people and transfusing it into older people who are experiencing Alzheimer's symptoms, they think it might be able to regenerate the brain in a certain way to ameliorate those symptoms and help people there. So,
Do you think there could ever be a one-pill cure for immortality?
definitely not.
Oh, rats.
And we'd all be redundant if there was.
I suppose that exercise and getting enough sleep then. Got to do that for a bit longer.
Hard work.
Oh, I want to do magic.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us, Hannah, and also make sure to check out her podcast, Struth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So hopefully you've learned a little bit about immortality and staying youthful, and perhaps don't go murdering your children in order to achieve this.
I think that's the moral. If our podcast is to have a moral center, like the tales we're describing, it would be...
Don't kill your children.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. And join us next week when we'll be talking about the Emperor's New Clothes with the science of psychology, mass delusion, and also about how to manufacture fine fabrics.
Until then, we hope you have a happily ever after.